Pouring more, says Brent. Michael says Chester, the drive to augment water availability with storage is to allow intensification of land use, not to protect from drought. And we know what happens then, says Michael. So various responses to that. This one we found quite interesting. A Dunedin man who was caught drink driving at 4 times over the legal limit has written a penance song and been discharged without conviction. 18-year-old Alexander David James Grant was charged after going to get some food for his friends in August last year. He did the Right Track program aimed at getting young driving offenders to change their ways and was given time to write a song to show what he had learned. This is what he came up with and was played to the court yesterday.
Eyes gone, slurring to filled with flow. Battles, distractions, and pressures that you never knew. Red heart behind the wheel. You know you're bound for disaster, no thought of the future.
All right, well,
Please make it stop.
We'll just leave it there. But anyway, that's choices by Alexander Grant. Yeah, so but he got off Chester with that song.
Yeah, but the point is, well, Right Track, firstly, is an excellent program. So he didn't just go home, write a song and get off. He actually went through a program. The next thing is, he's 18 years old, so he's a teenager with a bad attitude or he's stuffed up. What sort of pound of flesh do you want? Because if he's 4 times the limit, which is quite low, I think, for his age. In fact, I don't quite understand that, because if he's under 20, I think the limit is 0. So 4 times 0 is 0.
So exactly, isn't it meant to be 0? But his youth.
Yeah,
well, it certainly affected the court because they were in tears. I think the Judge Michael Turner, it really affected him. So
isn't that genuine remorse and resolve not to do it again, and that's what you're wanting? So if you're saying, okay, you know, we're going to fine you $2,000, or you're going to have to go and do some community-based program for 400 hours or something like that, what more are you going to achieve if what you're really looking for is remorse and a change of course?
What do you think, Rwani? I mean, is it good to see the sort of justice in action where a young person has done a course,
I think the
seen
course
the
is
error?
a great idea. Yep, absolutely. And just a little bit of stuff like peer pressure made him do it, you know, no kind of personal responsibility there. And had he not been from Otago Boys High School, maybe he'd been from Whangarei Boys House School, or,
you think?
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that a difference? I don't know. But I did look up his Facebook and I thought, you know.
And he seemed to be very remorseful. He really wanted to see the error
Most
of his
people
ways.
are when they're
Could have been marked on a better song, perhaps. Was it a good enough song, Chester, do you think?
No, because it wasn't country or western, the only styles of music. But I do worry about this justice by postcode stuff, and I think you're quite right. You know, if it was the kids from Whangarei or Hastings Boys High School, would he have got treated in the same way?
Just a question. Just putting it out there.
You've been wonderful, both of you. Thank you very much for being with me on the panel. Chester Borrows and Rwani Pereira, thank you very much for your company.
Kia ora.
Friday tomorrow, I'm there, 3:45. See you then. It's Checkpoint next.
Te whakaroa mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, $300 million to tackle homelessness. But is the government just rearranging deck chairs with its housing stock? The coronavirus death toll climbs past 1,300. We speak to someone who has the virus. How does it feel? What is it like? Celebrity chef and Anglican minister Sir Des Britten is remembered as a giant of the Wellington community. RNZ bosses get a select committee grilling over apparent inconsistencies in their comments. Locals at a Wellington beach are sick of years of human waste fouling the water. And the big dry spreads across large chunks of the country. There is one upside though, it is apparently good for the grapes. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government's announcement on emergency housing has been described as a major breakthrough in the housing crisis. The Prime Minister has unveiled a $300 million action plan to tackle homelessness. It includes creating 1,000 transitional housing places by the end of the year for families now living in motels. Scott Figgenshow from Community Housing Aotearoa says the plan explicitly links tackling homelessness to providing affordable housing.
Now, this plan is going to take consistent resourcing over many, many years to come, and we hope it will be able to engender cross-party support so that that can continue to happen. But I think we're going to look back on today, 10 years from now, as the day that we started to break the back of this housing crisis.
Scott Figgenshow from Community Housing Aotearoa. However, the National Party is sceptical Labour's plan will help, saying the waiting list for state housing is already close to 15,000 people. Health authorities are still in the process of tracking down 3,500 people who have arrived from China since the coronavirus outbreak began. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, told a media conference this afternoon that Healthline staff have not reported anyone who is refusing to isolate themselves.
As of midnight last night, around 2,500 people had self-registered, and I know that Healthline is working through the balance of people who have come into the country and haven't yet or haven't had the opportunity to self-register, so they're working through that as fast as possible.
Dr. Bloomfield says it's heartening thousands of people are quarantining themselves for the sake of the community. Healthline yesterday started contacting the 4,000 people who hadn't registered after returning from China, with officials estimating that would take 48 hours. A woman who worked for a man who was on trial for slavery has accused him of writing a fake letter to her parents in Samoa. The woman, who was 15 at the time, has told the High Court in Napier she was beaten and had her hands and wrists tied after escaping from Joseph Aunga Matamata's home, where she was kept locked up in 1994. Under cross-examination and through a translator, she denied writing a letter sent to her parents, apologising for making up lies about Mr. Matamata.
No, this is my signature, but I deny making any letters, writing any letters. I know, Aunga knows my signature.
The woman says she was never paid any money for the work she did while in New Zealand. A man who murdered his ex-girlfriend and her young daughter and hid their bodies under an Auckland bridge has lost his appeal. Kamal Reddy strangled Pakiza Yusuf with the cord of an iron in 2006 and used a pillow to kill her daughter Jojo. The bodies were only discovered in 2014, 8 years after their deaths, when Reddy confessed to undercover officers during a Mr. Big police investigation. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 21 years. The Court of Appeal today dismissed his appeal against his conviction. Sky City's chief executive has confirmed it won't be hosting the APEC summit due to fire damage to its convention centre. The government will have to find alternative accommodation for the high-profile summit, which involves a year of hosting events from the end of this year. Most of the country is now under either a fire ban or restrictions. Fires are not allowed at all for the entire North Island, with the exception of Wellington, where a permit is needed. In the South Island, Central Otago, Inland and North Canterbury, Marlborough and Nelson all have a total ban. In the rest of Canterbury and Otago, fires are restricted. Tim Mitchell from Fire and Emergency says people need to be careful.
Because things are so dry, it will only potentially take one spark. So there is a very high risk at the moment across a large area of the country for a wildfire to start and do damage.
Tim Mitchell says using machinery can spark a fire and people are encouraged to use them at cooler times of the day. It's 4 minutes past 5. The country's top-performing sports people of the past year will be honoured at the Holberg Awards in Auckland tonight, with women expected to dominate the awards. 4 of the 5 finalists for Team of the Year are female, with the Netball World Cup winning Silver Ferns heading the list. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
The awards are one of the more open in recent years. Up against the Silver Ferns are the World Series winning Black Ferns Sevens, the Black Caps, and 2 rowing crews, the Women's 8 and the Women's Double of Olivia Lowe and Brooke Donoghue. The Sportswoman of the Year award shapes as a tight contest, with canoeist Lisa Carrington seeking her 4th straight award, but she has strong competition from Silver Fern Laura Langman, Snowboard world champion Zoe Sadowski-Synnott and motocross world champion Courtney Duncan. MMA fighter Israel Adesanya, Australian Supercars champion Scott McLaughlin, shot putter Tom Walsh and Black Cap skipper Kane Williamson are the contenders for Sportsman of the Year, while Sophie Pascoe heads the finalists for the Para-Athlete Award. The Silver Fern coach Dame Noeline Taurua appears a shoo-in for the Coach of the Year. This is Stephen Hewson.
The Hong Kong leg of the Rugby Sevens World Series will be postponed until October due to the coronavirus outbreak, according to the South China Morning Post. The Hong Kong Sevens, considered the marquee stop on the 10-tournament circuit, was due to begin on April the 3rd. And the White Ferns' final T20 cricket match against South Africa in Dunedin has been abandoned due to wet weather. New Zealand won the series 3-1. That's the news.
Sidestepping the media
and ensuring that in talking to you that my message was not edited or contaminated by interfering comment not associated with the facts.
A borrowed tactic.
They're trying to stop me because I'm fighting for you, and I'll never let that happen.
But will it work?
Even if you hear directly from the politician, it's still you're hearing from that politician, and the politician is putting things in a certain way. So it is potentially a problem for democracy.
Cutting through the spin. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow, some afternoon fine breaks. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine, some areas of cloud morning and night, and the chance of a brief shower in Northland. To Nelson, fine with variable high cloud. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods with areas of drizzle, gradually clearing from the north tomorrow. Coastal Marlborough, the Canterbury Plains and Christchurch, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha. Becoming overcast tonight and areas of drizzle developing. Drizzle clearing around midday tomorrow, but remaining mostly cloudy. Inland Marlborough, the Canterbury High Country and inland Otago, fine or becoming fine tonight. Fiordland and Southland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers from tonight until tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government plans to tackle homelessness and we speak to a coronavirus patient. But let's begin tonight with breaking news. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has said he was involved in having a photograph taken of journalists Guyon Espiner of Radio New Zealand and Matt Shand of Stuff, and of the former New Zealand First President Lester Gray. The photographs were then posted on a website which has been running stories defending New Zealand First and trying to belittle reporting about the New Zealand First Foundation donation scandal. When the photographs were raised with him by Peter Williams of Magic Talk Radio on Tuesday, Mr. Peters said, quote, "We took the photograph." We'll speak to Guyon Espiner shortly, but first, here is the audio of Mr. Peters speaking on Magic Talk. Winston Peters is talking to host Peter Williams about a breach of privacy and the release of party information.
It was a breach of the privacy laws of this country. That's a criminal offence, and we had already said we're going to put this in the hands of the police, and we are.
But the source of the story has been identified as Lester Gray, hasn't it? He's been pictured meeting with Guyon Espiner and with Matt Shand, so he's a former president of New Zealand First. Wouldn't he have obtained that information in the course of his role when he was the president of New Zealand First?
No, he couldn't have, legally. And the real point is, the foundation is a separate body. And can I just say this, that source that you say has not been identified, which in the Shand or the Espiner articles, paragraph or line, says he's the source. The very reverse is going on here. They're denying it. But, you know, the forensic investigation on this is so easily capable of being traced that we're asking the police to do it.
Well, there's a photograph of Espiner with Lester Gray meeting in Tauranga and then with Matt Shand coming to join them a few minutes later.
Yeah, I know. Look, Mr. Williams, I know that. We took the photograph. Just to prove that that's the kind of behaviour going on.
Now, let's just listen to that again.
Well, there's a photograph of Espiner with Lester Gray meeting in Tauranga and then with Matt Shand coming to join them a few minutes later.
Yeah, I know. Look, Mr. Williams, I know that. We took the photograph. Just to prove that that's the kind of behaviour going on.
Well, joining me now live here in the studio is Guyon Espiner. Good evening, Guyon.
Kia ora.
Let's back things up a little bit. What does this photo show?
Well, there's a photograph of me and Lester Gray taken in Tauranga. And there's a short video as well. It's just a few seconds long, really. And there's also a photograph on that website of Matt Shand. And now Matt Shand has been doing a lot of reporting on the New Zealand First Foundation and about the donations that were received by the foundation and some of the activities that were going on there. Now, this photograph then was posted to a website called BFD and has been accompanied with stories belittling the reporting on that and very strongly defending New Zealand First.
And to put it into context for people, the man in the photos with you is related to New Zealand First in what way?
Well, it's the former president of the party, Lester Gray, who was publicly in the media at the time resigning from the New Zealand First Party as president because he said to the media at the time that he didn't have enough information to sign off on the financials, and he resigned, what is quite public now, from the party. And so this photograph shows me and Lester Gray outside a cafe, and then, as I say, it also shows a photograph of Matt Shand.
And so what do you now know about the origins of the photo?
Well, I was pretty surprised to hear just today, because I wasn't listening to the program at the time, but I just heard the audio today, to hear the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand say, "We took the photograph," is pretty interesting to me, and I think will be interesting to others and is newsworthy. News to me that he was involved in this. I think it might provide some more context to this BFD website. As I say, It's been heavily defending New Zealand First. I traced the domain name of this. A technical contact email is andrea@whaleoil.org.nz. Now, look, I don't know the exact links of this website. A lot of people might not have heard of it, BFD. And they have been running these stories supporting New Zealand First. But I was surprised to see that Mr. Peters saying publicly that he was involved in the taking of photographs, and then the photographs then appearing on this website.
So just to be clear, it's in essence a surveillance photo. You were unaware that you were being watched and being filmed.
I was absolutely unaware I was being photographed and being filmed, and I had no idea that I was being photographed and filmed. I wouldn't have raised it. I've known about this photograph for some time. For a week or so, a couple of weeks since it's been up, and I wouldn't have personally raised it. As I say, I was shocked, actually, to hear the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I'll leave names out of this, right? I was shocked to hear the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand say, "We took the photograph."
Are you going to take it further? Can you take it to the Privacy Commissioner? Will you speak to the police? What happens now?
No, I won't. I'll leave that all of that stuff to others. And what I will do, and what Radio New Zealand will continue to do, is to report the facts soberly and meticulously. That's what we've been doing, and that's what we'll continue to do. I don't have any role in that, and I was actually a bit reluctant to come in here to talk about it because I don't want to be part of the story. But it was developing at a pace, and look, it is what it is. He said what he said. I'll leave that to others who have a role in this, and I'll try to stay out of it. What I will do is keep reporting on the foundation. That's what I will do, because I think there's more to discover there, there's more to report there, and I think there are matters in the public interest there. So I was hoping to stay out of this, but that hasn't been possible.
Okay, well, now you are front and centre regardless. So when the Deputy Prime Minister of a country publicly states that he was involved in capturing surveillance footage and photographs of a journalist in their day-to-day job, are there questions that Mr. Peters now has to answer? answer?
Oh, look, I think there are undoubtedly questions that media will want to put to Mr Peters, and others may have questions as well. Given my role in this and the position I'm in, I'm going to leave that for others, not because I'm ducking stuff, but I just think it's my job to keep reporting on this rather than to offer opinions about what Mr Peters has done. And I haven't done that tonight. I've said that I was shocked. I was personally shocked to hear him say that. In terms of his conduct, that's up to others to judge. I won't be making any judgment on that at all. I don't feel that that's my place to do so. I'll be reporting on the facts of the Foundation.
Appreciate your time. That is investigative journalist Guyon Espiner. As you heard there, Winston Peters, well, he said on another radio station that we took the photograph in reference to the picture of Guyon Espiner speaking to a former president of New Zealand First, and also a photo of another journalist involved there as well. And in the past few minutes, we've spoken with Mr Peters. He was about to board a plane and said he was unavailable for an interview. He told us he did not personally take the photo. We asked him what he was referring to when he said to Peter Williams, "We took the photo." He refused to answer those questions and the conversation ended. Checkpoint has asked the Prime Minister's office for comment, and they say it is a matter for New Zealand First. And just a reminder, if you want to go back and catch up on Guyon's reporting on the New Zealand First Foundation and political donations, you can do that on our website. The government's pumping $300 million into tackling homelessness in New Zealand, but details on where new homes will come from remain scant. The plan will add 1,000 new transitional housing places to current stock, but only about 150 of those are projected to be new builds, with the government either buying or renting the rest. Critics say that's essentially a reshuffle of what's already out there, and unless more homes are built, the homeless problem won't be going away anytime soon. Our cameraman Nick Monroe and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
Auckland woman Andrea Bartlett is on the brink of homelessness.
I have 6 children dependent on me, and also when I've looked for private rentals I get declined, and also the housing list seems to be quite long, so I'm a priority as I believe A17, but above that is A20, so I'm not even at the top of the list.
Andrea's been renting a home in Avondale for the past 2 years, but her landlord is selling up. She's turned to Auckland Action Against Poverty, desperate for help.
It's emotional because, I'm going to be homeless with me and my 6 children, and it's, I'm a citizen of New Zealand, and, I'm educated, not that it should matter, but, and I'm a good person, and my children deserve to have their roots placed down, whether it be with a housing house or a private rental, like I've been a really successful renter and pay my bills on time. But we're going to be homeless in like 2 weeks because nothing's come up.
Andrea worries every night about becoming homeless, and she's not alone. The number of people living in motels to stay off the streets has skyrocketed in recent years. In the 3 months to December, the government spent $48 million on emergency accommodation.
It is such a temporary way of existing, and it doesn't represent an efficient use of taxpayers' money, renting or leasing from a motelier, rather than us having something that we can more permanently use, either in the short term or for longer term housing.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today announced $175 million to get people out of those motels, so-called emergency accommodation, and move them into 1,000 new transitional housing places by the end of the year. That will involve the government renting 400 new properties, buying an additional 300 to 450, creating around 150 spaces in portable housing, and in a small number of cases using unused student accommodation or former motel rooms. That means that of the 1,000 new places, only roughly 150 of them will be new builds. Auckland Action Against Poverty's coordinator Ricardo Menendez-March says more houses need to be added to the government pool so others aren't forced from their homes.
Of course, anything is better than a car. We should not accept that people should be living in cars, but at the end of the day, what we need to see are those permanent, bold injections of resources into building more state housing.
The government says today's announcement is in addition to the permanent housing it's building. Other public housing was expected to increase by 1,600 homes a year to about 6,400 extra homes by June 2022. But with more than 14,000 people now on the waitlist for public housing, there's still a long way to go. Andrea Bartlett and her 6 children have just joined that queue, and she says the new builds can't come soon enough.
I've rung like hundreds of places to just ask, and you just get shut down, and it's just, what do I do at the end of the day? Live in the car with my children, and they go without their schooling as well. That's a huge thing too, and also my family, the only thing that has been offered is a women's refuge, but I would have to be without 2 of my oldest children, and that's just not really possible at this stage,
And that was Nita Blake-Person reporting there. If you were listening on the radio, you can watch that video item. It'll go up on our Facebook page and our website. It's about 5:20, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on that. So the government's going to acquire another 1,000 transitional housing places, but only about 150 of those will actually be new builds. The rest will be acquired from existing stock. Does that go far enough? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. RNZ's Chief Executive, Paul Thompson, and Board Chair, Dr Jim Mather, faced intense questioning by MPs this morning after a week of controversy. RNZ announced last week Concert FM would move off FM and become fully automated on an AM frequency to make way for a new youth radio station. Consultation with 18 concert staff was underway. They believed they were going to lose their jobs. But the government came out strongly against this, saying it had asked RNZ to wait to see if a spare frequency, which was sitting unused at the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, could be freed up. Logan Church reports.
Appearing before MPs this morning, Dr Jim Mather attempted to clarify his board's position.
Did RNZ explore the option of securing a third FM network for our planned service for young New Zealanders? Yes, we did.
Dr Mather went on to say the Ministry for Culture and Heritage was approached in mid-2019 to see if an FM network could be made available for broadening RNZ services. He told the committee the advice they received was that it would be incredibly difficult for RNZ to get access to them due to the funding required. But this contradicted earlier statements by CEO Paul Thompson, who earlier in the week told Checkpoint RNZ hadn't requested an extra FM channel. He was asked to clarify this by Labour MP Dr Deborah Russell.
Did you explicitly ask for a frequency for the youth radio?
What I did is I talked about...
I've heard that. I've asked a very direct question. Did you explicitly ask for a frequency?
No. But what I did
thank you. That's what I needed to know.
And Dr Russell had also asked about miscommunication RNZ admitted had taken place. What exactly was miscommunicated and who did the miscommunicating?
I think when we were talking with the Minister and we were talking about starting the staff consultation, he was talking about the option of providing this additional support. It was misunderstood that our discussions would also include mention of concert coming off FM. That was the miscommunication.
So who was responsible for that miscommunication?
Well, I think we just have to say that we should have done a better job of communicating it clearly.
Because our understanding is the Minister explicitly directed you to wait.
Well, I think this was the confusion.
Mather then retreated to RNZ, where he gave a lengthy interview on 9 to Noon, where he denied RNZ had gone against advice from the Broadcasting Minister.
There were 2 strands of discussion going on, is my assessment of this. The Minister's having a separate conversation with MCH about the possibility of securing this unused FM frequency, and the only conclusion I can come to is that in those 2 different conversations, there was this miscommunication. Now, in terms of the difference in position between what actually occurred afterwards, I want to state very emphatically, RNZ did not go against any advice provided by the Minister.
He told 9 to Noon a business case would now be developed to explore securing the additional frequency.
What happens now is we work with government and via, particularly with MCH, to develop a business case around securing the FM network spectrum, and identifying specific things like costs.
Broadcasting Minister Chris Farfoy reiterated he had told RNZ management in January he would ask Cabinet for a frequency to be freed up. And today, Jacinda Ardern said she believes they had reached a good position.
Ultimately, though, I think we've reached a good position. Constant stays on the FM, and work has been underway to try and support some of the other aspirations that RNZ have to reach their wider audience.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
The number of new cases of coronavirus appears to be stabilising, but the death toll continues to climb, with 242 more deaths reported by China today. And the World Health Organization says the outbreak could still go in any direction. But it's also said the cases outside China don't seem to be as aggressive or as accelerated. The disease is still having a profound impact in a number of countries, with Formula One's Chinese Grand Prix postponed and the world's largest mobile phone showcase called off in Barcelona. The ABC's Barbara Miller reports.
The number of people diagnosed with coronavirus in China has now reached almost 45,000. That represents a slowing in the rate of reported new cases. But the WHO's Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says it's too early to take heart from those figures.
The number of newly confirmed cases reported from China has stabilized over the past week. But that must be interpreted with extreme caution. This outbreak could still go in any direction.
The death toll from the virus at 1,114 in China and one outside is not slowing. Michael Ryan is the Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Programme.
We've seen that the length of illness is quite long. So what we're seeing now, unfortunately for some people, are end-of-life moments where people have been kept alive through huge efforts of the health workers, but some people cannot be saved.
The Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, praised Cambodia, which has now agreed to let a cruise ship, the MS Westerdam, dock after it was turned away from 4 other countries over fears those on board could have contracted the virus.
This is an example of the international solidarity we have consistently been calling for. Outbreaks can bring out the best and the worst in people.
Despite a possible stabilisation in new cases, the number of restrictions in place worldwide because of COVID-19 continues to increase.
And that's Barbara Miller reporting. Incapacitated, needing help to breathe and surrounded by doctors in hazmat suits is perhaps the go-to image of those infected with coronavirus. Not so for Rebecca Fraser, who has COVID-19 as it's now known. Curiously, she looks just fine. She's in isolation in a Tokyo hospital after testing positive for the virus while on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship that's now docked in Yokohama and in lockdown for 14 days. Her husband's still stuck on board. Rebecca says she's shocked she has tested positive for the deadly virus, given how fit and well she feels.
Just can't believe it. Can't believe this is happening to you. I'm not one to freak out. So it's not like I broke down in tears or anything like that or screaming and yelling. I just took it for what it was and, come to the hospital and get well.
Did you feel unwell? Do you feel unwell?
No, I never really felt unwell. I had a little bit of a cough when they told me. And when I got here, I had a bit of a fever, but all of that has normalized and I have no symptoms.
So what's happening then? Are you being treated or?
No, there's no treatment for this unless you have some severe respiratory thing happening. But no, it's just isolation, quarantine here in the hospital, checking vitals and things of that nature.
So what's happening in terms of people who come into your room? Can you describe what it's like? How are they dressed? How do they treat you and deal with the situation?
Yeah, so it's doctors and nurses who come in. They have a plastic gown or apron covering their scrubs, a mask, a face shield, gloves. They do that every time they come in, and they're just checking vitals, temperature, lungs, blood pressure, heart rate. So, and they do that a few times a day.
And the people who say clean your room or bring your food?
Those are the nurses. Sorry, there's just somebody coming in to clean my room. She's fine.
And so the person coming in to clean your room, curious, Rebecca, are they dressed fully in the same kit or what?
Yes, they are.
So face mask, gloves, eyes covered?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So do you actually think you're sick?
I kind of don't. But I am going to be tested later on today again for the virus. It's a 2-step process. So I'll be tested today and tomorrow, and I'll have to wait for those results.
So what is it like being there on your own? Because your husband, he's still on the boat, isn't he?
Yes, he is. He's still on the ship, still waiting out his quarantine. He still tests negative, so that's good. I'd like it to stay that way. And just waiting until we can be reunited.
Is there any explanation, have they given you any explanation as to why you may have it and he doesn't, given you are in such confined quarters?
No, pretty sure it's just luck of the draw. I'm just lucky like that, I guess.
So what happens after you are tested again? If that comes back negative, are you free to go home and your husband stays on the boat?
Right, so I am free to be discharged if those tests come back negative. What I'll do is I will stay here in the area until his quarantine is up, and then we will go home together.
And have you had any information about whether there are any issues with airlines carrying you, and also what happens when you touch down at home?
Yeah, so basically we've had correspondence from the U.S. Embassy that there won't be any issues with commercial flights. We can book those freely, and there won't be any additional quarantine once we return to the States.
So just to be clear, because I'm looking at you and you look perfectly healthy, not even a tickle in the throat, no coughing, no sneezing, nothing?
Nope, I feel perfectly healthy. So it really came as quite a shock that I had this. I expected it to be way more severe, real bad cold or flu symptoms, but it wasn't. So, and it sounds like that is the case for the majority of the coronavirus, quote unquote, sufferers or folks who've been diagnosed with it, that a lot of them don't experience or exhibit a lot of symptoms. It's really those, specialized age groups who are most at risk that develop the extreme symptoms.
So, and what have medical staff told you about that and what to expect?
They haven't really said anything. They're just monitoring what I do have.
Hey, you seem pretty relaxed about the whole thing.
I am. I mean, I'm not a flail my arms and, rush around and scream and holler and break down and cry type of person. This is just a blip on the radar, and in hopefully, a couple weeks, a month, a year, it'll all be a distant memory.
So that's former cruise ship passenger Rebecca Fraser, who has been diagnosed with coronavirus. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, emotions run high as the woman accused of defaming Sir Bob Jones gives evidence in court. The Wellingtonians fed up with their swimming spots being contaminated by human poo, and tributes flow for the TV chef and restaurateur Des Britten, who has died aged 82. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch about the transitional housing announcement that the government's made today. They're going to secure 1,000 new places by the end of the year, or also the news that Winston Peters seems to have been involved in taking pictures of journalists covering the New Zealand First Foundation. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And Susanna's standing by with the headlines.
Community Housing Aotearoa has welcomed the government's emergency housing announcement as a major breakthrough. Today, the Prime Minister unveiled a $300 million action plan to tackle homelessness by creating 1,000 more transitional places for families now living in motels. Scott Figgenshow says the plan explicitly links tackling homelessness to providing affordable housing. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has said he was involved in providing photographs for a story on a website about the New Zealand First Foundation and its donations scandal. The website has been running stories defending New Zealand First and trying to belittle the reporting, questioning the donations. Fire crews are battling a large scrub fire near Waterholes Road and State Highway 1 near Rolleston, south of Christchurch. Fire and Emergency are asking people to avoid the area if possible, and motorists are advised to take care on the highway due to smoke affecting visibility. Fire bans or restrictions now cover most of the country, with total bans for the entire North Island apart from Wellington, where a permit is needed. In the South Island, Central Otago, Inland and North Canterbury, Marlborough and Nelson all have a total ban, while restrictions are in place in the rest of Canterbury and Otago. Residents of Wellington's south coast are demanding action to protect a marine reserve as sewage continues to contaminate Orfiro Bay. Contamination readings over January and this month have routinely been up to 30 times the safe-to-swim level. Wellington Water says it is investigating how the contamination is getting through. Community leaders in Hastings are warning that speculation over who is to blame for a child's horrific injuries could jeopardise the police investigation. A 4-year-old boy is in a stable condition at Starship Hospital after the beating at his home in Flaxmere 2 weeks ago. Hastings District Councillor Hienare O'Keefe has seen the boy's family being named and abused online, which he says is dangerous and unnecessary. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business news now with Emma Hatton. Emma, Sky City today posting a massive half-year profit. What's behind that?
Yes, Sky City Entertainment posting a massive net profit of $328 million for the 6 months ending December. Now that's compared with $82.8 million the year before, so up nearly 300%. The reported profit, though, was a lot higher because of a couple of big one-off payments. So there was $200 million from selling its Auckland car park concessions and $240 million in the insurance payout after the convention centre fire. So leaving aside those one-off items, the underlying profit was down 16% to $75 million, which is more or less where they expected to land. So that's what the company is focused on, is that normalised profit, down in part due to the fire and disruption around car parking, also the City Rail Link disruption there affecting that. Overall, though, business at home is performing well for them. Their properties in Hamilton and Queenstown going strong. What let them down is their international business, bit of a slowdown in Asia. They're also keeping an eye on things with, of course, the effects of the coronavirus, which are a bit uncertain for them at the moment.
So speaking of Sky and the convention centre, where are things at with that?
Yeah, so damage caused by the fire has been described by Fletchers as complex. So they're still essentially in clean-up mode, and they will be until mid this year when construction is expected to begin. They've found significant fire damage to the steel supporting the roof. There's mould, as you'd expect with water and a hot summer. A huge amount of fire and water-damaged fixtures and fittings that will need to be replaced. There's also potentially areas of the facade that is adjacent to the roof that may need to be replaced. Now, this will require a specialty product to be brought in from the US. That product will take up to 14 months to be made, so potentially a really long lead-in time for actually securing some products. So it's not going to be ready in time for APEC next year. We weren't able to get any indication if it would be done by 2022 either. So, in fact, under the current arrangement that Sky City has with the government, the centre needs to be completed by the 1st of January 2023. So that date may need to be revisited.
Interesting. And Sinalay Milk share price down dramatically. What happened?
Yeah, so Synlait Milk downgraded their earnings forecast today, and the market did not like it. The share price dropped 18%. They downgraded their half-year earnings forecast to between 26.5 million and 28.5 million, compared with last year's 37.3. Their full-year net profit is also expected to be down in the range of 70 million to 85 million, sort of dashing hopes that it would beat last year's 82.2 million. The lower end of that range that they've given is actually it's about a $5 million range that they've got there, because they just don't know what the coronavirus impact will be on them as well. So it's a buffer zone, if you like. The big driver of their downgrade was basically less demand for their infant formula product. That's Chinese buyers consolidating overseas, some of them not quite ready to, they don't have their brands registered yet, so they can't get that product in. So Synlait are a bit disappointed. They weren't expecting that. They were hoping that they'd have a bit more cash to get things moving at their newly set up Pokeno site. That site, of course, a bit messy for Synlait, who will head to the Supreme Court in April over some covenants that are on the land. Good news, though, for farmers. The company recently increased its milk price forecast, and that figure should stick.
And speaking of figures, what were the numbers for the dollar and market close of play today?
Yes, so the NZX Top 50 index fell 17 points to close at 11,881. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 64.5 US cents, 95.9 Australian and 49.8 British pence.
Thank you, Emma. That's Emma Hatton joining us from our Wellington studio with your business news this evening. The racing industry says they've reached crisis point, but they're not happy with how the government is proposing to fix things. The country's three main racing codes, New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, Harness Racing New Zealand and Greyhound Racing New Zealand, made submissions to a select committee today on proposed reforms. The $1.6 billion industry says the changes give the racing minister, Winston Peters, too much influence over the commercial entities. Here's our political reporter, Charlie Drever.
The racing industry is in agreement something needs to change.
When you get out there at the coalface, and this is all about animals and people, we see declining foal populations, empty trainer stalls, very low industry confidence and morale, and our top people, even our top people, questioning their future in the industry right across the country.
That was New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing Chair Alan Jackson, who is one of the half-dozen industry leaders who told the Select Committee that reforms have long been needed. The bill sets up a new regime for the industry, finalising a governance structure, creating a framework for property to better benefit the racing industry, and new ways to seek approval for betting products. But he doesn't think the bill in its current form is up to the job.
Unfortunately, and in our view, the majority of the bill before us today is an organisational solution to the financial challenge. In its current form, NZTR believes it will not address the key challenges that allow the code to deliver on its potential, and in fact may make us worse off than we are today.
One of their gripes is the amount of say a racing minister would have over the industry. Another is that TAB New Zealand would be given exclusive rights to the industry's intellectual property. Greyhound Racing New Zealand Chair Sean Hannon says the codes are commercial entities.
The bill proposes a number of potential interventions by the Minister that we don't think are necessary or necessarily helpful. We work collaboratively together to resolve a lot of the issues. We're not government departments, yet some of the proposals suggest that we would be treated more akin to a government department.
And Harness Racing New Zealand Chair Ken Spicer laid out the problems around handing over their intellectual property exclusively to the TAB.
We're not sure what parts we can and can't use without going back to the TAB. I mean, at the end of the day, that's our IP, and we just want something in the form that we actually know that we have a contract arrangement with them rather than having it through the bill.
Nationals Racing spokesperson Ian McKelvey says that needs to be addressed in the legislation.
They certainly have some value in their IP, and I think that they think that for it to be locked up in one place even for a period of 6 years, which is the latest proposal, is a long time. And so I think that there must be a way we can look at in the bill to just alter that so it suits the industry and suits the participants.
And it looks like changes could be on the horizon, according to Racing Minister Winston Peters.
The reality is there's probably about 7 points that we need to tidy up. And that was always going to be the case, but because this has been around since 1965, the need for reform, we've got to get it right this time.
Winston Peters told the industry leaders today it's Parliament's job to get the bill right, and it will. A report is due back from the Select Committee in April. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Tears flowed as the filmmaker being sued by Sir Robert Jones talked about how denigrated she felt by his column calling for a Māori Gratitude Day. Renee Maihi has taken the witness stand on day 4 of the trial to defend a petition where she called for Sir Robert's knighthood to be revoked. The column called for a Māori Gratitude Day, saying Māori should bring Pākehā breakfast out of gratefulness for existing, which Ms Maihi says created an image of her people as slaves. Mediana Johnson was there.
Renee Maihi was overcome with emotion when telling the court how she felt reading Sir Robert's column.
I identified my entire race and suggested they should become servants for a day for Pākehā. Regardless of whether the suggestion was made seriously, I found the imagery of servitude and slavery that the column invoked to be offensive and racist.
Ms Maihi says while she accepted that Sir Robert wasn't seriously suggesting Māori bring Pākehā breakfast in bed, it was the imagery of servitude the column evoked that made her angry.
It upset and angered me as a Māori woman and the mother of a Māori son. The idea that someone would ridicule, belittle, disrespect and denigrate my son, my ancestors, my friends, my whānau, my people was unacceptable to me.
Ms Maihi says she's experienced racism throughout her life, including being terrorised by her mother's Pākehā partner who cut the strings on her guitar because she was playing a Māori song, and being racially taunted at school when she was 10.
It's become clear to me as an Indigenous person that racism is a dangerous and potentially life-threatening mindset.
Ms Maihi says Sir Robert does not have the mana befitting of a knighthood. Her lawyer, Davy Salmon, is using the defences of truth, honest opinion and qualified privilege. He says that Ms Maihi does not accept that her petition damaged Sir Robert's reputation because it is already generally bad, based on his publicly expressed views on Māori and other ethnic groups.
It is clear in the light of day, applying 20 norms, and even before we come to expert evidence on the nuances and precise limits and delineations of racism and hate speech, that what was said by Sir Robert in the early days could not properly be said now without immediately being described as racist.
The courtroom was packed yet again, with the judge having to stop proceedings on more than one occasion so more seats could be found for members of the public. After court was adjourned for the day, Ms Maihi was given a round of applause from people in the public gallery, and a wahine stood and sung a waiata tautoko for Ms Maihi. The cross-examination of Renee Maihi will continue tomorrow. Dr Moana Jackson is expected to take the stand as an expert witness later in the trial. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Mediana Johnson, DNA.
And it's about 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, keen for your feedback about anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government wants to stop relying on motels for emergency housing, but it won't stop using them entirely. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, and Housing Ministers Megan Woods and Chris Whaafoy have today unveiled a $300 million action plan to tackle and prevent homelessness. It includes $175 million for an extra 1,000 transitional housing places by the end of the year to get families languishing in motels into more suitable places. For more on this, I'm joined by the Minister, Megan Woods. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening, Lisa.
The 1,000 transitional housing places, talk us through where they are coming from, the makeup.
So there's about 4 different ways in which we're getting together that 1,000.
the critical thing for us is we get as many houses as we can, as quickly as we can, particularly with winter coming, and get people out of those motels. So it will be through a range. Some of them will be housing and urban development. We'll do some medium to long-term leases of some houses to bring those in. We'll have Kāinga Ora, which will buy some houses, which in the medium to long term actually can be transitioned into normal public housing stock after we no longer need them around homelessness. Then we're also looking at a very small proportion of that 1,000, probably somewhere between 10 and 20% being sort of the temporary housing villages, and then an even smaller amount, sort of less than 1% probably, around looking at some converted facilities, maybe unused student accommodation, or the kinds of things where it might be quite suitable for single-person accommodation.
Okay, so Minister, in terms of raw numbers, you're talking about 100 to 200 prefab type houses, are you?
Yeah, so we're looking somewhere between 10 to 20%. The easy thing would have been to do is to say these 1,000 houses were all going to be of that temporary nature and do temporary housing villages. But what we wanted to do was make sure actually we had some more medium and long-term solutions for people as well, that these, a number of the houses, particularly the ones we're buying in, actually will be suitable in the long term as regular Kāinga Ora public houses.
Okay, so just looking at some of the raw numbers being reported, about 400 being rented, buying 350 to 450, and around 150 of these temporary houses. So that means, just to be clear, that only 150 to 200 of these houses will be adding to the housing stock, if you see what I mean. Otherwise, you will be acquiring already existing properties.
That's not quite the case, because of course some of the houses that we lease or buy, particularly the buy-ins, actually are new builds themselves. And one of the kind of parameters we've set around the houses... So,
sorry to interrupt, Minister, but could you give us a number then for the number of additional houses that will be added by these 1,000 places?
Sure. So in terms of what I can tell you, so as you know, that we have 63 houses that are ready today for people to move into, that we've already delivered those. In fact, 39 of them already have people living in them. So of those, I mean, they've all been either HUD investor leases or Kāinga Ora buy-ins. Of those 63 houses, seven of them are new builds. They haven't previously had anyone living in them. But look, we have set some parameters around this. What we won't be doing is ending existing tenancies in the leases we take out. These will not be houses that have previously been in the rental market. What we need to do is ensure that we have places so that we can get people out of motels, that we can get them set up on a pathway to having permanent housing solutions.
This is a drop in the bucket, though, isn't it, Minister?
So it's a start. We know by no think the job is finished, but what we have is a situation of New Zealanders who are living in motels for far too long. That is not acceptable. It is our obligation as a government to make sure we've got plans in place that actually we can work with people and get them into a situation where sustaining tenancies, being able to rent a place and stay in that house and that home for them and their children is their future, not in a motel unit with a fridge that is too small to put a whole weekly shop in.
Is it materially different to move from a motel room to move into a room in a disused rest home or a room in disused student accommodation? Is that materially different?
Lisa, that, as I said, is less than 1% of what we'll be providing. In terms
but is it much different? Because people listening might think that those are very similar accommodation types.
As I said, that is less than 1%. And these numbers are not fixed in stone. We will be matching what we need to do in terms of the demand. What is materially different is getting people out of motel rooms and into homes and on a pathway to actually being able to sustain a long-term rental, whether that be in the public or the private sector, that we know we have to do this. We have far too many people who do not have the ability to sustain a tenancy or the ability to rent a home at the moment. moment. And as a government, we can't stand by and do that. So we're talking probably in terms of the converted facilities for some people, in terms of the single people, that may be the most appropriate accommodation. But what we are absolutely determined to do is make sure we've got alternatives for people that are about setting them up for a good future.
So in terms of transitional housing, what do you anticipate is an acceptable length of stay to be in transitional housing?
Well, look, that will differ from person to person. So
but you must have a goal that you're trying to achieve here.
So part of the package we put in place today, Lisa, is actually some more support around the tenants that will have brokers that work with people and in terms of the strengthening tenancies. For some people, that might be a very short period of time. It is actually about just the ability to find a rental and move on. For some people, they'll need more intensive support, learning budgeting skills, the ability to sustain that tenancy and to get in a position to do it.
I do understand that, Minister.
We're not going to evict people so that they end up homeless again. We need to continue to work with them. But what we also know is that over time, some of these houses, because of the way we've chosen to do this, taking the long-term view, could well be converted into regular public housing spots. So we are going to be flexible and we're going to make this work for people, because ultimately this is about families who are living in motels.
But you can't give me an idea of how long you would characterise a transitional stay as being. So the goal was to spend 7 days in motels, which has extended out to, an average of 7 weeks now for a lot of people. So how long could people expect to be in transitional accommodation?
Lisa, I'm not going to put a time frame on that, because this is not a cookie-cutter approach. This is about working with individuals and making sure we're getting them in the right place so they can sustain a tenancy. We're not going to have a hard and fast rule of a number of days that if we end it, we end up back at square one and they're homeless all over again. That would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve with this policy. This is about an investment by our government to ensure that we don't just sit by and have children growing up in motels. That's not the New Zealand I want to live in, and it's not the New Zealand that most people I talk to want to live in. It also doesn't make any sense. The amount of money that we're spending on motels as a country is not good for the economy, and it certainly isn't serving the individuals well either.
Is it the expense? Is that the reason you're going to start charging people 25% of their income for emergency accommodation?
No, not at all. And actually, this was the suggestion that came to us from the community housing sector, that there is an anomaly that someone who is receiving transitional housing through HUD and someone who is receiving motel accommodation through an emergency special needs grant from MSD, one was paying, one wasn't. What we were not seeing was actually the ability to work with people who were paying no rent, the ability to work with them around budgeting skills, getting them set up so that they could sustain a tenancy and move along the pipeline, the housing pipeline, out of emergency accommodation into transitional housing and set them up well for the future so they can sustain their own tenancy. And this was something that we as I say, that we had the community housing sector come to us and suggest as something that was really necessary in order to set people up for a good success rate in the future.
Thanks for joining us. That is Minister Megan Woods there talking about the government's announcement today of 1,000 additional transitional housing places. A lot of you are getting in touch about this issue, so let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. This person says, with homelessness being such a crisis, you'd think the government would be more supportive of the tiny house movement. Innovative, affordable, sustainable, empowering, but regulation getting more and more heavy-handed, putting them out of people's reach financially, that person says. Another person says, it makes me so angry that Aotearoa has come to this. This is not right, let alone kind. It is high time to put a serious rent cap on greedy landlords and make land banking illegal. Time to do it. Kia kaha, says Marie. Also, this person says, asking whether 150 new transitional dwellings is enough to tackle the homelessness problem is answering your own question. Of course it won't be enough. Housing is already a hot hot-button election issue, and it is only going to get hotter if the stats on homelessness under this hopeless government grow even worse, Jason says from Christchurch. And John has also got in touch to say the government should be applauded for making more housing stock available for those who are currently in emergency motels. RNZ appears to say this is a bad thing. I disagree. They are building and buying homes to improve housing stock that was allowed to run down by the previous regime. Some of you have also been getting in touch about our story earlier this evening regarding reportage on New Zealand First Foundation and news that a photo had been taken of our reporter Guyon Espiner meeting with someone in relation to his reporting duties. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, it appears, is saying that they took the photo. This person says, I'm not a coalition government supporter, but I am deeply concerned by the Deputy Prime Minister being involved in the surveillance of journalists. The issue is not the privacy of the individuals involved by virtue of the fact that they were in public, but that the idea of free press is a critical pillar of any true democratic society. Mr. Peters needs to explain, and if he can't, the PM must either censure or remove him from his post, says Josh. On the other hand, Bella says, isn't it funny when the gaze is turned on to journalists how outraged they are. They spend their time probing into anyone else's life they want to. That's okay because they claim the high moral position of discovering the truth. Muckrakers who deserve to have their techniques revealed and reviled, says Bella. Get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. We'd love to hear from you. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The National Party says the government has failed on housing and throwing money at it now won't fix the problem. Today, the government unveiled a $300 million action plan to reduce homelessness. $175 million will be spent on building 150 new houses and renting or buying about 800 properties. The aim is to reduce the number of people needing emergency housing being put up in motels. But National's Simon O'Connor is sceptical.
Well, they haven't delivered for almost 3 years. The waiting list for state housing is now inching towards 15,000 New Zealanders. We have more people in motels, people still living in cars. That is an abject failure.
Simon O'Connor says the National Party will still use motels for emergency housing if it is elected this year until more suitable options are built. Community leaders in Hastings are warning speculation on social media over who is to blame for a child's horrific injuries could jeopardise the police investigation. The 4-year-old boy is in a stable condition at Starship Hospital with brain damage and other injuries from a vicious beating at his home in Flaxmere 2 weeks ago. A Hastings District Councillor, Henare O'Keefe, has seen the boy's family being named and abused online, which he says is dangerous and unnecessary.
If you do have information, genuinely so, come forward with it. But in the meantime, let's all take a good look in the mirror and let's all go home and fulfil our domestic obligations.
Henare O'Keefe says people are deeply upset, but they need to let the police do their job. The jury in the trial of a woman accused of murdering her abusive partner has heard what her son told police the night of the stabbing. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, charged with murdering Joseph Ngāpera in Manurewa in 2018. Today the jury heard what Ms Riddell's youngest son, then 14, told police at the scene. His words were read by Crown Prosecutor Chris Howard.
I wasn't awake when they was fighting. I just woke up from my bed when I heard Mum scream. I walked into the kitchen. I pushed Joe away because he was arguing with Mum. The next thing I know, Mum had a knife and stabbed Joe.
The words of a teenager whose mother is accused of murdering her partner. Fire crews are battling a large scrub fire in Rolleston in Canterbury. The fire is at Waterholes Road and State Highway 1 between Rolleston and Templeton, and that's been closed. Fire and Emergency is asking people to avoid the area while crews try to control the blaze. 3 phone and internet providers have been fined more than $120,000 for billing customers after their contracts ended. Slingshot, Flip Services Limited and Orcon Limited, all owned by Vocus New Zealand, pleaded guilty to making false representations and invoices over 6 years until 2018. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The company's terms and conditions said customers would stop being charged 1 month after they terminated their contracts. But nearly 6,000 people were billed a total of $120,000 beyond the 1 month period. A judge said the billing was not deliberate but was highly careless. The Commerce Commission says this is the third such case in a year, and it hopes the convictions will make telecommunications companies change their processes. This is Hamish Cardwell.
Residents on Wellington's south coast are demanding authorities take action to protect a marine reserve as sewage continues to contaminate Ōwhiro Bay. Over January and February, contamination readings were routinely up to 30 times the level deemed safe to swim. Wellington Water's Stormwater Advisor Benjamin Fountain says it is investigating how the contaminants and human waste is getting through.
What we have found is 3 cross connections within Ōwhiro Bay catchment, and there may be more. It's not the only problem. There is wider issues in the network, and we're continuing to track those down.
Benjamin Fountain from Wellington Water. It's 4 minutes past 6. The country's top performing sports people will be honoured at the Halberg Awards in Auckland tonight, with women expected to dominate. 4 of the 5 finalists for Team of the Year are female, with the Netball World Cup winning Silver Ferns heading the list. The race for the Sportsman and Sportswoman Awards appears much closer than in previous years, but Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua is a shoo-in for Coach of the Year. The former All Black flanker Adam Thompson will make his debut for the Chiefs against the Sunwolves in Tokyo this weekend. The 37-year-old, who was called into the Chiefs squad as injury cover during the pre-season, will start at blindside flanker. Thompson's last Super Rugby match was for the Melbourne Rebels in 2016, and it's being reported the Hong Kong leg of the Rugby Sevens World Series will be postponed due to the coronavirus outbreak. The tournament was due to be held in April, but will now be played in October. The Commonwealth Games gold medal winner boxer Jimmy Peau has died. He was 54. Peau, who won his gold in the super heavyweight division in Edinburgh in 1986, recently underwent brain surgery. US media outlets are reporting the former Lakers basketball star Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna were buried in a private service in Southern California last week. The pair were among 9 people killed when the helicopter they were in crashed last month. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Brad Warrington, a.k.a. DJ Sticky Fingers, continues the story of Kiwi hip-hop. Tonight, we're into the noughties. We've got a window on the world of gluten-free. This week's overseas correspondent Lien Huang is on the line from Vietnam, and Eric Brenstrom updates us on the world's weather, including the bushfires across the Tasman. The good news, rain is putting them out. The bad news, now it's flooding. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne to Waitatapa, fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow, some afternoon fine breaks. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine, some areas of cloud morning and night, the chance of a brief shower in Northland. To Nelson, fine with variable high cloud. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods with areas of drizzle, gradually clearing from the north tomorrow. For coastal Marlborough, the Canterbury Plains and Christchurch, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, becoming overcast tonight with areas of drizzle developing. Drizzle clearing around midday tomorrow, but remaining mostly cloudy. Inland Marlborough, the Canterbury High Country and inland Otago. Fine weather, becoming fine tonight. Fiordland and Southland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers from late this afternoon, evening until tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Deputy Prime Minister and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says he was involved in having a photograph taken of 2 journalists and former New Zealand First President Lester Gray. The photographs were posted on a website which has been running stories defending New Zealand First while criticising stories about New Zealand First Foundation donations. The photographs were raised in an interview with Peter Williams on Magic Talk Radio, and it was in that interview that Mr Peters said we took the photographs. When contacted by Checkpoint just before 5 o'clock tonight, Mr. Peters was about to board a plane and was unavailable for an interview. He told us he did not personally take the photo. Checkpoint asked him what he was referring to when he said, we took the photo. He refused to answer and the conversation ended. It comes as a One News Colmar Brunton poll released a few minutes ago showing New Zealand First in dire straits, with National at 46%, Labour at 41% and the Greens at 5%, ACT at 2% and New Zealand First at 3%. That would mean National could govern with ACT and scrape in with 61 seats. It would see New Zealand First gone. So should National feel like winners? Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is former United Future leader Peter Dunn. Good evening, Peter.
Hello, Lisa.
Can we start with Winston Peters and this assertion from him that we took the photo in reference to this photo of Guyon Espiner meeting with a former New Zealand First president? Does this, has Mr. Peters got any questions to answer here?
Well, I think he's got to clarify firstly who we are. I'd be very surprised and would find it hard to believe that we could be anyone associated with the office of the Deputy Prime Minister. I think it's far more likely we are people from New Zealand First. Now, whether they just happen to be casually in the area and snap the photo, or whether this is part of some ongoing surveillance of either Mr. Espiner or Mr. Gray or both, I think they're the sorts of questions that need to be answered. I think it's very unwise, though, for Mr. Peters, as the leader of New Zealand First and particularly as the Deputy Prime Minister, who's previously said he's had nothing to do with the New Zealand First Foundation, to be getting involved to that extent in this particular issue.
Given his dual positions, obviously as New Zealand First leader and Deputy Prime Minister, does this leave the Prime Minister in a difficult position?
It leaves her in a very difficult position. At one level, there's an argument for saying that while the Serious Fraud Office is investigating the claims about the New Zealand First Foundation, the practice that's been adopted in the past of ministers standing aside should be applied. That's probably more likely to apply to him as Minister of Racing only. But at another level, now you've got this sort of bigger question about just what was the New Zealand First Party doing, presumably with the approval of its leader, otherwise he wouldn't be saying, we took the photo. And that does raise some questions of conduct, I think, for the Prime Minister. Her problem, of course, is if she stands him down, that's her coalition gone. And on tonight's figures, that's her out of office.
Right, well, that's the perfect segue, isn't it, Peter? If we look at the poll this evening, we have National ahead significantly from Labour and able to govern if indeed ACT did deliver 2%, just to scrape in with the 61 seats. And obviously the earlier poll this week, the Reid Research poll, also had the National Party ahead of Labour. Should Labour be worried, this government be worried?
Yes, I think it should be. I mean, it's far too early to start sort of, making the absolute predictions, but the trend is starting to firm up. National is pretty solid. Labour seems to be, I wouldn't say it's slipping, but it's some distance behind. I think ACT is picking up. I suspect it's probably nearer to 3 seats than 2 at the moment. But the thing that's interesting in the poll tonight to me was the Greens down to 5. To win again, Labour's got to get both the Greens and New Zealand First over the 5% threshold. Well, New Zealand First look like they're gone. If the Greens start slipping around that 4.7 mark, and they go all together, that would make Labour's job impossible. So I think that's the thing to watch. And it's going to be very difficult for Labour. It's put out some big announcements already this year, and they don't seem to have connected with people. So I think it's going to be all on.
Two things though, New Zealand First, as Winston Peters often points out, tends to poll much stronger, closer to the election. And also on this latest poll, it does require to ACT to get over 2%. The earlier poll this week showed ACT only returning one person.
Yeah, well, let's take each of those. I think New Zealand First does poll better on election day than opinion polls, but at the same time, the Greens have precisely the opposite effect historically. They poll much higher than they actually get on election day. So, you might get New Zealand First over the line, but not the Greens, or vice versa. But for the Prime Minister to win again, she's got to get both over. So I think the problem is becoming quite real. On the ACT one, I know these figures reasonably well, having been in a party of similar size. 1.2 gets you your second MP with an electorate seat. 2.1 gets you the third. So, if that's in that range of 2 to 3 seats, and National's holding firm at around 46, allowing for the waste vote, and I won't go into that because it's a technicality, you could govern if you get about 48% of the vote, you can get a majority. Well, that's what they're looking at the moment. So this is where it's going to come down to. It's going to be these little battles at the margins, not between the big parties, but to see who can actually get either over the 5% or bring in people over the other threshold as well. And that will make the difference as to who governs.
So in conclusion, it's going to be a tight race, basically.
I think it's going to be a very tight race, and I think people who thought that the government would coast to victory better think again. I think that people who thought the opposition would finally get justice for what happened, it saw happening to it in 2017, they better think again at the moment. It's all bets are off. It's anyone's race. National's got its nose in front at this very early stage.
Thanks for joining us. That's former United Future leader Peter Dunn. The jury in the trial of a woman accused of murdering her abusive partner has heard what her son told police the night of the stabbing. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, charged with murdering Joseph Ngāpera in their Manurewa home in November 2018. It's the Crown's case that she stabbed him with an intent to kill, while her defence argues she was acting in self-defence after years of abuse. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this story. And just a note to listeners that this story contains violent details that may not be suitable for all listeners.
Karen Riddell's youngest son saw her stab Joseph Ngāpera the night he died. He was 14 at the time. He spoke to Constable Wepiha Te Kanawa about what happened at the scene. The police officer wasn't permitted to share what was said in court when he gave evidence this week. However, today Crown Prosecutor Chris Howard read his notes to the court. This is Mr Howard's voice, but the teenager's words.
I woke up. I walked into the kitchen. I saw my mum arguing with Joseph. I think she stabbed him with a knife. I think she's drunk. She doesn't usually drink.
The teenager told Constable Te Kanawa his mum then threw the knife at a nearby doorway.
I think my mum got upset because Joseph was talking about my sibling in a negative way. I wasn't awake when they was fighting. I just woke up from my bed when I heard Mum scream. I walked into the kitchen. I pushed Joe away because he was arguing with Mum. The next thing I know, Mum had a knife and stabbed Joe.
Constable Sarah Hunter arrested Riddell at the scene of the stabbing that night. She described the woman's behaviour as erratic.
Her mood was erratic. She would switch between crying hysterically, followed by anger and aggression. She was shouting out. She asked me, "Is Joseph gone?" I responded, "Yes, he is dead." She kept saying, "Should have been me."
Constable Richard Parisi drove Riddell to the police station with Constable Hunter sitting alongside the woman in the back seat. He told the jury he overheard something that caught his attention.
I heard the defendant asking Constable Hunter, "Is Joseph gone?" Constable Hunter replied, "Yes," and then I heard the defendant say, "Thank you, Jesus."
Riddell's lawyer Shane Cassidy took issue with this, given Constable Hunter herself hadn't recalled the incident when giving evidence just minutes earlier. Mr Cassidy asked the police officer if his client may have been talking to herself rather than Constable Hunter.
I'm not too sure. Basically, when I heard it, obviously I turned the rearview mirror just to have a look at her, so I wasn't too sure if she was talking at her or to herself.
Riddell was granted a protection order in July 2016 that Ngāpera went on to breach, but by the time Ngāpera died, the protection order Riddell sought had been discharged at her own request. Riddell elected to give evidence in her own defence this afternoon, describing to the jury a childhood marred by domestic violence and alcoholism.
Oh, just being the oldest, you had to take care of everything and make sure that when your parents went out that the kids were taken care of and, fed, house clean and everything, and protecting them when they need you.
And when did you start calling the police?
Oh, my mother used to send me out the road, say about 8 years old, to the phone box to ring the police to come and help her.
She said the drinking and violence continued into her adult life, where romantic partners threatened and hurt her. It's not disputed she stabbed Ngāpera that night, but her defence has argued she was acting in self-defence after years of abuse. Riddell will continue giving evidence tomorrow morning. Atu I te ko Te Matua ko Annika Smith Aho.
It's almost 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. TV chef and restaurateur Sir Des Britten has been described as a Wellington trailblazer with a unique vibrancy and energy. He died early this morning after a battle with cancer, aged 82. Jonathan Mitchell looks back at his life.
Sir Des Britten will be remembered by many for his 1970s television cooking show and was the country's first celebrity chef. His Wellington restaurant, The Coachman, was at the vanguard of fine dining. David Nicol worked with Sir Des for 7.5 years from 1969.
So I was thrown into it. We were doing about 30, 40 at lunch and much the same at night. And away we went. We were just pumping it.
He says Sir Des was ahead of his time.
He was doing sautéed loose whitebait, fresh whitebait, which used to go out across the chef's bar in just about truckloads. And we used to do chocolate soufflés. Well, he was doing chocolate soufflés in early 1970? No one, really.
Sir Des was made a Knight Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit in the 2012 New Year Honours for services to the community. He was Wellingtonian of the Year in 2011, having been the City Missioner from 1994 until then. The current Wellington City Missioner, Murray Edridge, says Sir Des will be deeply missed.
He leaves a huge mark. I mean, he brought a vitality and a vibrancy to the City Mission and to mission work in Wellington in general that lasts to this day. So when I go and talk about this Wellington City Mission to audiences and to the public, when I ask them what they know about the City Mission, the first thing that's mentioned is Father Des Britten.
He says he cared deeply about people.
We saw that when he started to feed people from his restaurants in the early days, and he just had a heart for those who were doing it hard. And what he introduced, I think, to Wellington was the idea that we can all do something to help those for whom life is a bit tougher than it is for ourselves.
He was a restaurant critic during much of his time and was inducted into the Food Service Hall of Fame, having published a number of cookbooks. Sir Des was ordained as an Anglican minister in 1983 and was the vicar of St Barnabas in Roseneath. The Wellington Mayor, Andy Foster, says Sir Des leaves a big legacy for the city.
The City Mission is just such an important part of our city and looking after so many of those people who are less well off. And there's some really exciting things that the mission is doing at the moment. Sir Des has been part of the kaupapa, the journey of the City Mission to becoming what it is today.
Sir Des is survived by their daughter Deborah and son Dominic. His wife Lorraine died last year. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, tēnei.
The CEOs of the two broadcasting companies heading for a merger, RNZ and TVNZ, have been talking today about what the future might look like. A business case to create a new super public broadcasting entity is underway after Cabinet signed off in late January. The plan is for a public broadcaster that would get government funding but would also be able to raise commercial revenue. Executives from RNZ and TVNZ turned up to Parliament for their regular check-in with MPs, and there was plenty to talk about. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
With the plan now confirmed by the Broadcasting Minister Chris Farfoy, the CEOs are considering what this means for their respective companies and the future of public broadcasting. Paul Thompson from RNZ told MPs the proposal has merit.
But it needs to be thoroughly tested with the business case process to see whether it will work. The other comment I'd make is that I don't think we can just allow things to remain as they are across public media entities in New Zealand. The world is changing rapidly.
Speaking to reporters afterwards, he was asked whether RNZ would be able to maintain its own voice.
We're a minnow compared with TVNZ, and that's not going to change no matter what we do. I think it's about us being as strong as we can be as a public broadcaster, because what we bring into those discussions is we know how to do commercial-free public broadcasting, and the government's policy is all about public broadcasting. So what we bring is that knowledge and vision of how to do that.
And he said balancing public broadcasting with a commercial operation would create challenges.
I don't think they're insurmountable, but you'd need to be very careful about how you managed it.
TVNZ's Kevin Kenrick also faced questions from MPs about the merger plan.
You know, all you're going to get out of a new structure is a new structure. It's actually what it does and what it delivers and how it impacts audiences that will determine its success. And so I think the focus on the detailed business case is very timely and is critical.
He said it would be an opportunity to create something that could last for decades.
Who are the audiences that you're trying to serve? What are their needs? What sort of content is going to be most available and most appropriate for those audiences? And then there's the next question of how do you fund that? And I would have thought that any dollar you can get is a good dollar, whether it comes from commercial revenues or whether it comes from taxpayer funding.
Restructure often leads to job losses, but he says that's not the intent of the new policy.
I think purely in a commercial world, you would typically see how do you identify and remove duplication. I think that there's an acknowledgement at the heart of this that journalism is at risk. So how do we not only preserve but enhance journalism in New Zealand? So to me, the objectives, the purpose is actually quite the opposite.
The business case is expected to go to Cabinet by May or June, after which ministers will decide whether or not to push ahead. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Samoan-born New Zealand boxer Jimmy Peau is being remembered as a gentle giant of the sport. The Commonwealth Games heavyweight gold medalist, who recently had surgery on a brain tumour, died in Auckland this morning aged 54. As well as winning Commonwealth gold, Peau won 2 world titles and was widely known for producing one of the fastest knockouts in boxing history. Boxing New Zealand executive member John Mackay was head coach of the national team during Peau's days as a South Auckland amateur. He told Clay Wilson he ran into Peau about 18 months ago, shortly after his return to New Zealand from the US.
I was a little bit taken aback by his physical and mental condition, really. It was a different person to the one that I knew when he was boxing as an amateur in Auckland, training out at Jerry Preston's place.
Going back to those days, what was your involvement with Jimmy and what are your lasting impressions of him?
I remember him as being a quiet man. Always had a nice smile, was always polite. He and Jerry were virtually inseparable at the time, and Jerry did a great job in bringing him up into international boxing class. I remember seeing the fight where he won the gold medal in Scotland in 1986, where he knocked over the Scottish boy at the end of the last round, and he was actually losing the fight till then, so that was a very, very big moment for Jim. And of course then when he turned professional and he moved away from New Zealand, I think a lot of the problems for Jimmy was he was badly mismanaged. And of course I didn't see it firsthand, but I did see the television shot of where he knocked out, I've forgotten the American's name, in 1.5 seconds. I think it was one punch, and knocked him out cold. I saw that.
Was that how you remember him as a boxer? Like, he was really renowned for that power and very well known for that particular fight.
Absolutely. He had huge power. He would knock people out, but he also got knocked over a few times himself, probably because his defence, he relied on his attack rather than relying too much on defence. So in terms of skill factor, probably not the most skillful fighter, but one of the most powerful punchers I've seen.
I want to go back to the Avondale fight because it is such a great story. Can you perhaps go into a bit more detail about your memories of that night and how that all played out?
It was a lead-up fight for Jimmy, either to go to the Oceania Championships or to go to something international. I forget what it was. And Akawandi was the boy to beat in the world at the time as an amateur. But Jimmy was there when he fought Akawandi, particularly in the first round. He went quite well. The second round didn't go quite so well, and he got frustrated, I think, because it was very hot. It was outside. It was a very hot day. And so he took his shoes off, and he put, why he ever put the crystals on his feet to roughen the soles of his feet off, I have no idea, but that didn't help in terms of getting blisters on the soles of his feet to the stage that almost the whole sole of the foot had actually come off.
You know, things didn't all pan out as he would have hoped when he went away, and he fell on some pretty tough times. When you started to learn about that, how did you feel about that, given, you know, your connection with him?
Oh, very sad, really. We had not really kept in close contact. When he came back occasionally, I might have talked to him, but only if I met him in the street. But he was a man who, for mine anyway, sort of kept to himself a bit. But he was what I would call a gentle giant, and I think he'd be listening to people, and he would take note of what they said, and he'd probably take it in. And at times I thought perhaps he might, just being a little bit gullible. And I say that in a nice way, not in a nasty way. He would take people at face value, and I think that was probably his downfall, particularly at latter stages of his professional career. You know, you would have to say that he was one of our great heavyweights, and certainly as an amateur. He was very well known. He'd fight anybody at any time, anywhere.
And that was Boxing New Zealand executive member John McKay there, reflecting on the death of Commonwealth Games heavyweight gold medalist Jimmy Peau. US Senator Bernie Sanders has emerged from the New Hampshire primary looking very much like the frontrunner in the Democrats' race for the White House. Second place, Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar, also had a strong showing in the second leg of the race. But it was one to forget for the former Vice President, Joe Biden, who will be hoping the more demographically diverse states of Nevada and South Carolina will breathe much-needed life into his campaign. The BBC's John Sopel reports on the state of the race.
He's left-wing, 78 years old, had a heart attack last October and is on fire. Bernie Sanders, the oldest candidate running, must now be considered the favourite for the Democratic nomination.
No matter who wins, and we certainly hope it's going to be us, we are going to unite together. We are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
A win is a win is a win. And Bernie Sanders supporters are celebrating their victory tonight. But he hasn't smashed it like he did 4 years ago in New Hampshire. And that will be a source of considerable relief to a lot of centrist Democrats who feared he might become an unstoppable train. His nearest rival is also the youngest person in the field, the centrist, telegenic, gay former mayor from South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg.
Politics of my way or the highway is a road to re-electing Donald Trump. Vulnerable Americans do not have the luxury of pursuing ideological purity over an inclusive victory.
But the former Vice President, Joe Biden, tipped as the prize fighter who would knock out all challengers, is looking punch-drunk, slumped on the ropes. He came a dismal fifth last night and scarpered out of New Hampshire before the results were declared.
So when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers talked about the race, tell them it ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
One centrist candidate who exceeded expectations was the senator from Minnesota. Donald Trump, who held his own spoiler rally in the state this week, and you see the Democrats engaged in a protracted battle where they're all waging war against each other, then life looks pretty peachy.
Excuse me for interrupting. That was John Sopel reporting. We will be back again tomorrow at the same time. Catch you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. National is sceptical about whether the government's $300 million plan to create more emergency accommodation will reduce homelessness. State Highway 1 south of Christchurch is closed between Rolleston and Templeton as firefighters battle a large scrub fire at Waterholes Road. And community leaders in Hastings are warning that people speculating over who's to blame for a child's horrific injuries could jeopardise the police investigation. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.